Hi everyone, it's Friday, so it must be coffee and chat, and we've got one of those sorts of strange IT problems yet again on a coffee and chat, and I don't have a coffee again because I've been trying to resolve an IT problem, so water in hand. Today in Oxfordshire it's a bit blowy. Somebody tells me that Hurricane Ellen is going past, as she's one of my goddaughters and a complete spitfire. I can understand that she might be causing quite a lot of damage. Anyway, it's great to see you all. I have with me today, I'm delighted to say, an internationally renowned speaker. As normal, if you have any questions at all, please just pop those into the chat area. I'll pick them up at any stage. As those of you that know me well know, I'm sure to interject as Keld is speaking. But Sonia, if we can just move on a little while I introduce Keld. Keld is an international author. I have several of his books, I'm very pleased to say. He is a professor, speaker, advisor, and expert in negotiations. In fact, when we posted this talk, one of my colleagues came up straight away and said he is one of the best presenters she's ever seen. He always makes her laugh, and reminded everybody that he also does deliver training for the International Association of Contract and Commercial Managers, or IACCM. Keld has worked with leading global companies, governments and individuals as both an advisor and a trainer. Those have been quite eclectic, from Rolls-Royce to Lego. I'm not sure about the similarity between them, to Carlsberg, to Novo Nordisk. He's authored 24 books on international negotiation and communication and published in more than 36 countries and 18 languages with a total of more than 2.8 million readers. So quite eclectic. He pens a monthly series of articles on negotiation for Forbes magazine, so do watch out for those. He's an associate professor at multiple different universities, including Thunderbird University in the USA. I'm sorry, Keld, I've never heard of it, but it sounds absolutely awesome. He teaches in various international executive MBA programs and contributes to both electronic and print media with over 200 television appearances. So we really are lucky that he's come to join us today. In 2015 and 16, Mr. Jensen was recognized as among the top 100 global thought leaders in trust, which is obviously critical for negotiation. Every book that you read on negotiation talks about the importance of trust. And this was one of the big areas that Mr. Jensen was awarded for. In 2017, his concept of smartnership negotiation was awarded Best Negotiation Tender Strategy by Scandinavia's Organisation of Public Procurement Officers. More recently, he's been given an IACCM Innovation Award for Smartnership Negotiation Strategy, and he's been awarded and nominated for the 2019 IACCM Strategic Direction Award. So absolutely somebody that we should be following. I am really pleased to welcome Keld to our coffee and chat today. As always, we'll stop just on the half hour, but I'm going to interject occasionally. I am going to very unusually turn off my camera. We can't get Keld's to work, so he won't come on the camera, but we have a series of slides and we don't really want to interrupt what Keld has to say. Really good to have you all with us, and over to Keld. Becky, do you want to go on the camera?
Well, thank you, Kat, so much for inviting me. I apologize about the cameras. It's the whole world of technology and Mac and GoToMeeting that seems to be not very compatible. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. And thank you for that very nice introduction. We're going to talk about negotiation today, obviously, and the world has changed. I think we can all agree on that. So negotiation today is what someone would say different than it was 6, 7, 8 months ago, and yet it is actually not. And let me just share that with you for a second, because obviously a lot of people around the world have experienced that they are forced to negotiate online due to the pandemic. But the case is actually that we were doing that already even before the pandemic. I'll show you some numbers in a second that actually tells us that we did the majority of our negotiation online. And when I talk online, I mean video conferences, phone calls or emails, even prior to the pandemic, actually more than 70%. So we were there already, and we were going in that direction. Not that I'm truly happy about that movement, and I'm going to talk about that in a second as well, but just to let you know that going online is not just something that happened in connection with the pandemic. Anyway, just before I get started, as the slide is saying up here right now, there are really 4 things that is very important to understand, even before we start addressing negotiation, whether we are online or offline. And these 4 things are 4 things that we have discovered throughout more than 35 years of research within negotiation, both in the practical world and in laboratories. And what we've seen is that those negotiators that are far more successful than anybody else are actually fulfilling these 4 items. And in an unprioritized order, we need a strategy. And that means regardless whether we're negotiating online or offline, we need to have established a very clear strategy on how we want to negotiate. I'm touching upon that in a second. And as Kath was saying already, trust is so essential. And I've actually renamed trust into trust currency when we talk about negotiation. So obviously I just combine the word trust and currency for the simple reason that trust is actually a monetary value. We can put a value on trust, and we're going to talk about that today as well. Then we need to understand the rules of the game. That means we need to negotiate on how to negotiate before we start negotiating. And that becomes even more complicated the second that we are online, because we're not obviously in the same room. We can't see each other, basically just like right now, we're only hearing a voice. And we may perceive negotiation very differently. So one side of the negotiation may perceive negotiation like playing tennis, and the counterpart may perceive negotiation like playing chess. So obviously that will be 2 very different games that would be played. So we actually need to negotiate on how to negotiate before we start negotiation. And the 4th and the last one that we have discovered that is part of the 4 things that might change the world within negotiation is negoeconomics. And negoeconomics is really just negotiation economics. And very briefly, what we have discovered is that up to 42% of the values in a negotiation are often left on the table. That means neither of the parties has identified, capitalized, or utilized this value. And very quickly, the value is basically the asymmetric difference between the cost and the benefit of 2 parties. So giving a very simple example, cost of money, for instance, in terms of payment, you would simply sit down and look at what is the cost of money for both sides, and the one that has the cheapest cost of money would be the financing part. Anyway, if you Google the concept negoeconomics, there will be a lot of stuff, articles and videos and stuff popping up on that topic as well. If we could move forward with the slide, please. Thank you. What I just want to share with you is actually a study I did together with IACCM, as Kath mentioned already. And what we learned is that 95% of negotiators globally say that face-to-face negotiation is superior to online negotiation. Not a surprise. I was kind of expecting that. But when we did this study, and we actually did this prior to the pandemic, back in December, January, we learned that up to 70% of all negotiations are already happening 100% or partially virtually or by email. And then we got a side effect out of this study as well, and that was that 5% said that all negotiations are sincere. That means that 95% of everybody we talked to globally actually claimed that they didn't feel negotiations were completely sincere, that the counterpart were basically sitting at the conference table pretending to negotiate and was not able, willing, or had the potential to negotiate. That was a kind of a shocking number as well.
Isn't that sad though? I mean, that's a very sad statistic. So, you know, obviously there was a complete lack of trust in the vast majority of those negotiations if they felt they were insincere.
I would completely agree. And I think that is sad as well. I'm actually still surprised about that number, that many people think that negotiations are not really committed, or the negotiators are not fully committed. I think there's a lot of reasons in that, Kath. One of them is that I usually always tell my students and clients that we should only negotiate with those who got a mandate. Negotiating with somebody who is not authorized to negotiate is basically a waste of time for everybody. And I guess when we talk about governmental level and major corporations globally, we see that a lot of negotiators sitting at the table are actually not 100% authorized. You know, they can't make the decision. They're not signing the contract themselves. So that means the negotiation becomes several levels, because you have to go back and get authorized for whatever you negotiated. And that could sometimes make the counterpart feel that is not completely sincere or transparent. That could be
For me, one of the issues there is that actually is with international negotiations. So if you're negotiating with an international company in the UK, we find that a lot of the times our counterparts don't have the ability to negotiate, they have to take it back to the board, even though it's a small decision. So part for me thinks that it's not only a lacking in trust, but they haven't actually worked out the negotiation strategy. So those 4 rules that you gave right at the very beginning, which I think need to be reinforced constantly with negotiators, they haven't worked them through.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Kath. I experience so often that stepping into an organization, whether that is a government or private institution, asking them, could I please have a look at your official negotiation strategy? Quite often I find that there is absolutely silence then, because they're not sure if they got one, and if they got one, sometimes it's not the right one. So, and what I find even on top of that is some organizations have a number of strategies. You know, procurement got one, sales got another one, projects got a third one. So, you know, it's kind of a mess quite often. And I'm usually saying that not having a negotiation strategy is the same as not having a go-to-market strategy, a sales strategy, a HR strategy, a communication strategy. You need to have a strategy on how to negotiate. Could we move on with one slide, please? Thank you so much. Back to the 70%. So as I mentioned, what we discovered is that 70% or even more than that are already negotiating virtually prior to the pandemic. And if you break down that number, what we actually learned is that 41% of the 70% was predominantly negotiating by email, which is a bad idea. 38% was predominantly negotiating by phone, and only 21% were negotiating by video. Now, the headline today is actually the importance of body language in negotiation. And let me just stress that that is important. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a camera that's working right now, so my body language is non-existing, even though I'm sitting here with a body language and using my arms to make gestures, because that's just the natural part of how I communicate. But what is really scary is that we see an enormous amount of negotiation being conducted by email. And I'm not saying we should never use email as part of a negotiation, because obviously we should. It's easy, it's fast. But the danger is that we all know that written communication is so often misunderstood. And we get so easily offended, or we get confused, or we get whatever kind of emotions out of an email that was not the purpose of the sender. So emails should obviously only be used as a tool in between negotiation to confirm stuff, to ask questions, and to elaborate. It should not be a tool where we actually negotiate. I think there's several reasons why we fall in the trap of negotiating by email. One of them, and I don't want to offend anybody, is that we could be a little bit afraid of confrontations when getting into a negotiation. And email is easy because we can hide behind the screen. So we are not confronting, well, we are confronting the counterpart, but the counterpart can't really confront us face to face. So that means it's easier to send up a request or a demand by email instead of just picking up the phone, going on a video call, or actually meeting face to face. So if in the perfect world, I would actually swap the numbers we're seeing on the screen right now. I would prefer to have only a 21% or even below that on email. I would prefer to have 41% on video, even more than that. Now,
I think, but what you're saying, I think is really interesting, because I think a lot of it is also risk avoidance. So if it's written down, then they feel that they are passing the risk to somebody else. Obviously, these were all pre-pandemic, weren't they? So I guess the figures have changed. And I wonder now people are used to things such as Teams and Zoom and all of the other multitude of different tools they can use, and the ability to record those sessions, whether they think that that will make a difference because they will have a record of what was said.
Yeah, I guess you could be right about that, Kath. One thing though, one of the frequent questions I get from students and clients globally is that, how do I deal with a video conference negotiation where the counterpart is not switching on the video? That seems to be a thing, and I have to stress, I didn't not switch on my camera on purpose today, but it seems to be an issue that the counterpart is not switching on a camera.
But to me, that's one of the rules of the game that you've got to have agreed. So exactly. If you are negotiating it, on a video, then you have to agree that you are putting the camera up, because otherwise you've got a lack of trust again. If somebody has decided to have more than one person in the room, one person is actually passing notes to the person who's negotiating, and they haven't got their screen up, then that is a lack of trust both in their group and in you. And I would insist, I think, in the rules of the game that they put the camera on.
I completely agree with you, and it's a very valid comment you have, that it's something that we need to address even before we start negotiating. So it's something that we have agreed on, obviously, how we should move forward. If we could move one page ahead to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. Now, what I'm just showing you up here is a very old study, actually, back from UCLA. And I know there's a lot of people around the world that disagree with this one, but there's also a lot of people that agree with this one. I find some truth in it, though, because what UCLA found in this study, and this was way before the internet, actually, that came up as well, was that only 70% of the information that happens of any importance between human beings are based on words. So only 7% of the value, the reason that you would trust me, like me, want to work with me, is actually coming from the content of what I'm saying. 38% is coming from the tone of voice, and the remaining 55% is coming from the body language. Now, I'm using this slide right now just to show you that obviously nonverbal communication is so essential, and that is not far from important when we're talking about online negotiation. That is certainly important when we're talking face-to-face negotiation. Now, if we're meeting face-to-face, obviously we don't have to think about the body language as much because we are there already, and the tone of voice is obviously happening already. The second we move online, whether we have camera on or off, suddenly that becomes a challenge as well. Kath, just before you started, you mentioned that you've been watching the convention here in the US, the Democratic convention, and you mentioned that, what was it, Bernie Sanders?
So Bernie Sanders, he has the habit of, he talks with his hands. He can't stop himself. And this became the thing that I was watching. I stopped listening to him because he has quite a distinctive tone of voice. And I was counting and watching his hands, and they became a real distractor. The tone of voice can be on the end of a phone, yes, can be a nodding of a head on a video conference, but you have to, I think, watch out for that distraction as well. I don't know if you agree.
I completely agree. And one of the things that is a challenge, obviously, is that body language online is slightly different to body language offline. Now, back to the study here, I meet a lot of people that goes that can't be true. I mean, words must carry more weight. And I usually just use the example of when you hear a new song on the radio, what is it that you remember the first, immediately? Is that the lyrics or is it the melody? And it's always the melody. And that's the same thing as our nonverbal language. We remember the nonverbal language as the main carrier of trust and being convincing and likability. And then on top of that, then obviously we add the words and the content of what is being said. Can we move on with one slide, please? Thank you so much. We did a study recently among 2,500 organizations globally. And what we did was we were basically just monitoring nonverbal language in negotiations. And what we saw was that when we're in a face-to-face negotiation, obviously smiles, laughter, nods, and gestures were all quite high, as you can see. Not a surprise, obviously, because we're sitting there face-to-face. So we're all smiling, we use laughter, we have nods, we have gestures whatsoever. The second we moved into videos, as you can see, the smile and the laughter stayed almost the same, but nodding and gestures dropped quite a lot. So that means suddenly we got more restricted. We didn't want to, but we just get automatically more restricted in our nonverbal language. And obviously moving into phone communication, as you can see, everything drops right now, both smiling, laughter, nods, and gestures. And not a big surprise moving into text, whether that might be emailing or even texting or WhatsApp or whatever people are using, that is dropping completely. So back to the importance of nonverbal language, and then comparing that the second we go online, then we see a complete drop in all of these measures.
And I wonder if that's changing as we get more used to this online movement as well. So I attend Zoom calls where you can have several hundred people on the call. And, you know, some people have fairly obviously got their cameras frozen because they're not moving at all. And I wonder whether we actually will change our way of using video calls and therefore the nonverbal language as we get more used to this medium.
I think that's a great question, Kath, and I'm sure that the majority of users will get used to it and they will start acting differently or perhaps even more similar to how they would be doing offline. I'm sure about that because for a lot of people, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, I think it was an awkward feeling suddenly being online and having a camera watching you and addressing an audience that is not really there. I have to say that was something I had to get used to myself. I had been doing quite a lot of webinars prior to the pandemic, but suddenly when we were forced doing it all the time, it was a weird sensation sitting there doing a lot of keynotes without having an audience in front of you. So yes, I'm sure you're right, Kath. It's something that we're getting used to as well. But for some people, I still meet a lot of people today that just feels that the whole thing is awkward. It's just strange sitting there instead of having people and feeling people and having that personal chemistry that you generate differently face to face. I actually just want to forward one piece of warning, and that is, please don't make what we're doing now the new norm. I do talk to a lot of corporations that are saying, well, this is great. We actually don't need to meet up in the future. So when this pandemic is gone, hopefully one day, we don't have to waste the money on traveling in hotels and conference room and conferences and all of that, because we have just proven we can do our negotiation online. And I say, oh, hang on a second. That might be true that you could be saving a lot of money, but I can promise you at the other end, you'll be losing a huge potential of money as well, because we cannot conduct the same negotiation if it's important online as we can do face to face. And
I think the data shows that, Keld, doesn't it? I mean, you know, they've already said that online they think that they don't have enough trust, so they might complete the deal, but if the deal isn't as good, then there is no value in it. They almost, I genuinely believe that humans are social creatures, so I'm not sure that long term that this is a good position for any of us to be in.
No, I completely agree with that. Yes, let's step one forward. Another slide. Thank you. I just want to address trust, because as Kath initially said, I've been focused on trust for a number of years now, because I suddenly realized one day that trust has actually been dropping in the Western world. And it happened 8-9 years ago. I woke up one morning and I've got a weird stomach sensation that told me that trust had declined. And I thought that was bad news. So I wanted to write a book about that topic, but you just can't do a book based on your stomach sensation, because that obviously becomes very subjective. So I teamed up, with World Economic Forum. They went out and did a study among 15,000 people in 20 countries. And they actually came back and said, your stomach sensation was unfortunately right. Trust has dropped to the lowest recorded level since the 50s. Now, when I'm sharing that information with people around the world, I often see people go, oh, well, that was kind of that was kind of interesting, but I wonder when the next coffee break might be. And it's a little bit more important than that, because it's very important to understand that when we have a low level of trust in a negotiation, our transactional cost goes up and our profit go down. But when we have a high level of trust, our transactional cost will go down and profit will go up. So we can actually, and we've measured that, put a very, very clear monetary value on trust. Now, why do I talk about trust when we're talking about the importance of body language in negotiation, whether we are online, offline? I'm doing that because trust is harder to achieve the second we're negotiating online. Right now, when people can't even see me and I'm talking, it's harder for me to create trust, because obviously there's no nonverbal language, there's no body language, you can't see my facial expression, you can only hear my voice. So I'm down to that 7% and a little bit of the 38% in my purpose of trying to convince you about some information here. So it's very hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, because obviously we can establish trust negotiating online. We just have to be aware that we should have it as part of the rules of the game. So we need to address it. And we also need to address what happens if trust is actually dropping. So my warning right here is now is we can't expect trust to happen as easy as it may have been offline. And I know that offline, it's not even that easy either. So trust is something I would like to leave everybody with, understanding that is a crucial item, something that is really essential in order to be truly successful in negotiation. Could we move on with one more slide? Thank you so much. Now, this slide, which is basically the final one I got, is one I'm very often closing a keynote with or closing a seminar with, because I'm basically asking the audience the following question: would you agree or disagree with what I'm showing on this slide? And it's actually very simple. But what I'm claiming is that in order to be successful in a negotiation, we need to be open, honest, respectful, and show confidence. And that will lead us into a positive, progressive attitude, again, which will generate positive, good personal chemistry. Now, if you look below that, I'm also saying that it requires knowledge, creativity, generosity, and authority to be successful. Now, if we're able to do that, that will give us the ability to negotiate and communicate, which again will lead us into increased understanding. And the personal chemistry and increased understanding will improve cooperation. Now, if you could click one, please. So when we see an improved cooperation, that will generate problem solving instead of combat, creating added value, which is economics, and increase possibilities, and it will obviously increase understanding as well. So that will give us a reduction in cost, a reduction in risk, and an improvement in profit. Now, showing this slide everywhere in the world, I'm asking people, would you agree with the content of this slide? I agree that it's simplifying the world, but would you agree with the content? And you know what's interesting, Kath? Whether I'm in Japan or China or France or Italy or the UK or Germany or the US or Mexico, I get 100% vote where everybody says, I agree with the content of this slide. Yes,
Yeah.
I want openness and honesty, and I want respect, and I want the authority, and I want personal chemistry. I want all of that. So I'm often wondering, Kath, why is it negotiation becomes a problem sometimes? Because you want the same as the counterpart, and the counterpart want the same as you. Isn't that fascinating?
I think it's back to your lack of trust. You know, I think that it's a lack of strategy and a lack of trust, and it's a real shame because, you know, as you said, nobody can disagree with those last two slides. Everybody wants to reduce costs, risks, and increase profit. It makes an obvious sense. It's a real worry. It is a real worry. As always, you've blown me away. I always leave every time I listen to you. I think you take me in a different direction. This whole concept of a new way of working, I'm so pleased that you said that you don't think it's something we should continue to do, because I completely agree with you. I think that at some stage we are going to need to get back to face-to-face negotiation. I think that there is some real solid use in that. I think that what I've probably learned quite a lot in this period is I'm far better at my timing than I was in the past. A real meeting I have let overrun. A webinar or a timed meeting I very rarely let overrun. So that's probably the big benefit. But thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for it. Guys and girls, as usual, we've come to the end of our 30 minutes in record time. Keld has given us a huge amount to think about. I think we've got one more slide, Sonia. I'm not sure if we put that final one in or not. But Keld gave us his information. Please do follow him on Facebook or on YouTube. There are a huge number of his videos and recordings there. I really, really value his input today. Thank you so much, Keld. Guys and girls, we've decided to take a week next week where we're not holding a webinar, mainly because we have this very strange August bank holiday at the end of the month. I'm never sure why we've got a long weekend at the end of the month, but we do. So we're not in next Friday. Our following week, which is the 4th of September, a very important day in my family, is a coffee and chat with a difference. As some of you will be aware, we've started to become an endpoint assessment organisation for apprenticeships, and we have joining us our endpoint assessment organisation lead, Caroline, and I'm hoping that she'll bring along with her one of our future clients and indeed an apprentice, but to talk about what does this endpoint assessment organisation mean. So very different to today's talk. Keld, thank you for your time. I'm really grateful, and I hope we get to meet in person soon. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Bye.